Welcome back to The Bible is Art. We explore the literary artistry of the Bible. And this week, we're looking at the art of the riddle in the movie Inception, Plato's dialogues in the book of Jonah. The movie Inception ends with a riddle. The movie is about dreams and reality. Each character has an object called a totem that works differently in the real world and in dreams. Cobb, the main character played by Leonardo Dicaprio, has a spinning top that works normally in the real world, but never stops spinning, never falls over when he's in a dream. The top tells him what's real and what's fake. Throughout the movie, Cobb never sees his children in real life, but he would see them in his dreams, but only their backs, not their faces. In the last scene, Cobb enters a house and sees his children playing in the yard. They turn around and he sees their faces for the first time in the film. But before he runs to be with them, he spins the top to check that he's really in the real world. But instead of waiting for the top to fall, he changes his mind and goes to embrace his children. The camera then moves to the top, but cuts to black, ending the movie before we see the top fall, or if it does fall. There have been many analyses of the scene, but the problem with many of them is that they focus on whether the last scene was a dream or not. And while that's an important question, the more important question is, why did Christopher Nolan, the director, choose to cut before we saw if the top would fall? First, this is a riddle. That is, it is an intentionally opaque narrative tool. Nolan designed something that would take intellectual work to figure out. Whenever you're writing, every word, every sentence, and every scene can be placed on a spectrum from clarity to opacity. Authors are always choosing what things to make plain and what things to make opaque, unclear. And for skilled authors, they make those decisions based on reasons that move forward the story and its main theses and themes. For instance, if you have a man and a woman and you want to communicate love between them, you could write a dialogue where the woman says, "I love you." That would be a super clear communication of that affection. Or you could write a simple glance across a table at a work lunch. Or even more opaque, you could use visuals and have her wear light blue, only to find out later that's her prospective lover's favorite color. You may have wondered or guessed why she so frequently wore blue, but it wasn't clear until later. And whether you opt for one or the other, clarity or lack of clarity for a scene or an image or a dialogue depends on the purposes of the plot. Riddles are on the side closer to opaqueness. They intentionally hide, but they also invite. Riddles are particularly intriguing because they're often written to stand out, to not fit into the story, to block the regular narrative flow, so that the reader or watcher will be jolted into deeper levels of thought. So, why the riddle at the end of Inception? Well, before we understand the purposes of the camera's point of view, we must understand the main character's action. That is, Cobb spins the top, but then he changes his mind. Why? Well, this entire time, the thing that Cobb used to distinguish between reality and fantasy has been a top, a mere top, a chunk of metal. But when compared to the face of a person, his own children, that totem has no power. If the human face cannot distinguish between reality and fantasy, nothing can. Nolan is a consummate humanist in the medieval sense, believing that human personhood is at the heart of reality, not materiality, non-personal stuff. So then, why does he cut to black? Here is where the genius is. When the movie cuts to black, it literally forces you to look away from the top, to look away from the movie. That is, you are forced to do the very thing that Cobb did. You are forced to do the final climactic action as the viewer. The viewer must also look to persons in their life for reality. This is the meaning of the riddle. On the first level, it encourages engagement with the film, forcing the viewer to ponder. But more importantly, the answer to the riddle drives the thesis of the work down much more deeply. And when you can combine deeper, more strenuous thought with the deeper meaning, you have a beautiful work of art. Plato also uses riddles. For instance, a number of his dialogues remain unfinished, unresolved. That is, the main question of the discussion is not answered. These dialogues are called aporetic dialogues, from the Greek word aporia, which means an impasse or puzzlement. But Plato did this for a reason. He wanted this conclusion to feel unfinished, to feel strange and difficult. It is a riddle. For instance, in one dialogue, the main character cannot finish the argument, does not want to go on with it, so he says that he has to go sacrifice to the gods. Plato ends the dialogue unfinished because he wants to force the reader to finish the dialogue for himself. The reader has been trained in the first part of the dialogue about how to conduct a proper argument. So by the end of the dialogue, he is prepared to finish the argument. By ending without concluding the argument, and by providing an example of a character who is too lazy to finish, Plato is offering us an option. Will we be like this character, or will we be intellectually, philosophically virtuous and complete the argument? Once again, the riddle forces the reader into thought and action. Now to the Bible. The Bible is full of riddles, but we're going to look at the riddle at the end of the book of Jonah. And if you remember, Jonah was a prophet whom God called to go preach judgment to the wicked city of Nineveh. Jonah doesn't want to go, so he goes the opposite direction, getting into a boat and traveling west, away from the city. He's then thrown overboard, swallowed by a fish, and he repents. He then goes to the city of Nineveh, where the city repents, and God has mercy on the city. In the last scene, Jonah is angry that God relented against Nineveh and goes outside the city. Without any shade in the scorching sun, God makes a plant to grow and shade Jonah. Then God removes the plant, and Jonah is infuriated. In the final and climactic speech, God says this to Jonah: "You pity the plant, for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 100,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? Did you hear the riddle? The weird thing that didn't fit? It was the last phrase, and also much cattle." Now, you may think that it's just a language thing, like if we were Hebrew and understood the language, it would seem not weird, but that's not true. This was just as strange and arresting as it is now, and the author intended it to stop, to break the regular story. He wanted the reader to puzzle over why did the author add "and also much cattle" into a perfectly complete sentence without it. To understand why our author added it, we must understand some things that he's been doing since the first chapter. Think about this. Where have you heard this story before? God raises up a prophet who travels on a boat to proclaim judgment. That's right, Noah. The author is alluding back to the Noah story. Jonah is another Noah. Our author includes other details to fill out this parallel. For instance, in the Noah story, the rain falls for 40 days. And in Jonah, his message is that in 40 days, the city will burn. There's going to be a judgment. So also, God said with Noah that humanity had 120 years left to live. And in Jonah, there was 120,000 persons in the city. So our author is paralleling the two stories. But if you look a little closer, there are also some differences, discontinuities. You see, in the Noah story, Noah was on the boat because he was listening to God's call. But in Jonah, Jonah is in the boat because he was not listening to God. So if Jonah's boat is not exactly parallel to Noah's boat, the place of salvation, what is? Where is Jonah's boat? Let's keep reading because the author provides more clues. In the next chapter, Jonah is in the city of Nineveh and we're told about its length. That is, it takes 3 days to walk through it. Similarly, in one of the first things we're told about Noah's Ark is its length, 300 cubits long and 30 high. Notice also multiples of 3. When we get to the last phrase in the book, all of these subtle details come alive. The narrator tells us that there were thousands of people in Nineveh and also much cattle. And with that one phrase, he reminds the reader of one of the most characteristic features of the Noah story, the ark and its animals. And what the author is telling us is that the parallel to Noah's ark was not the boat in chapter 1, but the city of Nineveh. That was the place where God was saving his people. That was the place where the animals were spared. The very place that Jonah wanted and thought was the place of judgment was actually the ark. And that is the riddle of Jonah and the art of the riddle. Thank you guys so much for watching this week. I really appreciate it. If you would like to support the channel, it'd be wonderful. You can head over to Patreon, www.patreon.com/thebibleisart. Or you can visit my website if you got any questions or comments or anything. It's thebibleisart.com. Thank you so much.